Hey everybody, this is Chris with Overclockers Club. We've got some cool coolers from Cooler Master. See what I did there with cool, cooler? Okay, we've already looked at the Master Air G100M. That was done in a separate review. You can check out the link for that. And we'll do these two liquid coolers also in separate reviews. So today we're going to focus on the Master Air MA410M. It's an air cooler with some really nice features, so let's take a closer look. So this is the Master Air MA410M. It is an air cooler, and in a world that's saturated now with liquid coolers from just about everybody, there's certainly nothing wrong with an air cooler. Air coolers are known for their stability, and you have pretty much one or two moving parts, and that would be the fans. You don't have any pumps to worry about, you don't have any leaking to worry about. None of those issues with a good old reliable air cooler. Now I am a big fan of liquid cooling, so I'm not being mean to the liquid coolers, but there is something to say about an air cooler. So I'll walk through some of the features here. One of the things I wanted to point out first that I thought was kind of interesting is down here on the bottom there is actually a little sensor, and that's what this little cable here is for. It's a thermal sensor, so it keeps track of the temperature of the CPU, actually the temperature of the base plate here, which should be a direct reflection of the CPU temperature. We also have a 4-pin lead for each one of the fans. We have two 120mm fans on here. And the fan blades are actually set up so that this one here can help to pull the air through the cooler, while this one here is in a pusher, sort of a push-pull configuration between the two, but this one here is pulling air in and pushing it through the cooler. And then we have one more connector here, and this is for the RGB control, which of course we'll see a little later here when we get it fired up. But as far as features go, it comes with 28 addressable RGB LEDs that are inside here, and it puts on quite a light show, which I've actually already used this cooler for a couple of other tests, and it performed rather well. And the RGB system is really nice. I like it. It has an air guide armor, which is this plastic shroud around it. It helps guide the air through the cooler to get the maximum efficiency, which is really the amount of air that's running through the cooler and the amount of time it has to stay in contact with the little fins inside there to absorb the heat and carry it away. The other thing we have here is continuous direct contact technology, or CDC 2.0 as Cooler Master calls it. And what that amounts to, peel the sticker off here. On the bottom we've got 4 heat pipes, and they're sort of mashed together and machined off, so you have the maximum, really the maximum amount of surface area that you can have in contact with the top of your CPU. And they call that CDC 2.0. You're supposed to have approximately 45% more surface area that's in contact. So that gives you better heat dissipation. We have the push-pull fan configuration. Again, this fan is the pusher, this is the puller, so the airflow moves in that direction. Air guide armor, which again is this shroud that goes around it, and we actually have a slot in the side here that helps with when the air is being pushed through. And I've had these fans off and on. I might have them on the wrong way. I'll have to double check here. I might have them in the wrong configuration. So actually, now that I look at this, like I said, I've had the fans off of here a couple of times, and there's another story that goes along with that. Let me switch these into the correct orientation. Okay, so I got the fans off, and you can see it's really just a solid cooler here. Down through the center it's hollow, and you get an interesting RGB effect, which we'll see here in a moment. But the shroud here is what holds your LED array in. And I'll put the fans back on, but when I do testing, a lot of times you got to take fans off and put fans back on. And that's to accommodate this bracket, which I have mixed feelings about. It's kind of a neat idea to make it a one-size-fits-all. I like that idea, but it's a little cumbersome. and I found that the best way to try and put that on there, really the only way, is you have to take the fans off. It's a lot easier. So keep that in mind. But when I was taking the fans off and on, I got a little bit carried away. And the fans screw into this shroud here. This is really what your fans screw into. And it's plastic, so you have to be a little bit careful. If you get a little bit happy with the screwdriver there, you can easily strip the threads out if you're not careful. And I did that. So the first thought is, uh-oh, I've damaged this. But actually what I did is I took a 632 tap, a number 632, and I went back through the holes on the side that I stripped them, and there was enough meat in there for a 632 to work, so I just ended up using a 632 screw that I had, and it worked out. So I took a situation where I potentially caused some damage to it and fixed it. So it works just fine now. But keep that in mind when you're putting these fan fasteners in. Just don't get carried away and use a screwdriver and really torque them, because you will roll the threads right out of there. So anyway, back to the cooler. Again, we've got this sensor that's actually looks like it's epoxy to the base plate here. And what you can do with that is there is a mode that your RGB controller here, you can control the speed and you can switch between different modes. But one of them here, you can see, it might be hard to tell, but it's a thermometer. And when you push that, it goes into a temperature mode that basically the temperature or the color of the LEDs reflect the temperature from your CPU sensor right here. So when the system is cool or at idle, you will get blue LEDs through here. And as it gets hotter and you get up to the maximum, this will actually turn red. So that's kind of an interesting feature there. You can, at a very quick glance, look at your CPU cooler when it's in that mode and see what the temperature is. So now we'll get everything assembled. I got the bracket underneath. I got some good standoffs here so I can access the back and the cutout on this little temporary motherboard tray. This will make it easier to show you up close some of the thermal testing before I put it in the case. And we attach these little guys here. There's a little stick-on washer that goes on both sides of these little standoffs that you install first, and then we snug these down. And there's a little wrench in here also. Try not to go too tight, but I just snug them up. And then the next thing we'll do is get our thermal paste on, and then get the cooler mounted. And this bracket here that I wanted to show you, again, it has sort of a one size fits all, so based on what configuration the spread is on your holes here for the mounting is how you adjust this bracket. So for example, this is the setup for the Intel chip that I'm using right now, which is a 4770K. But first we have to get the thermal paste on there, get the cooler set down in the right orientation, and then you carefully fish this bracket through here. And you just need to be careful that you don't hit the thermal sensor there and damage it when you're assembling it. One thing I should point out as I'm putting this together, on the back side of this X bracket, there's a center post right here that sticks down. That actually goes into a small hole that's in the base of the cooler there. So that centers it. And then these little U-shaped notches here also coincide with a little pin that sticks up. So they're really features to align and keep this in the center of the cooler. So pay attention to those when you're putting the cooler on. So there we go, we got the cooler installed, and it is necessary to take the fans off to get to these fasteners. There's really no other easy way to do it. I mean, you can use the little wrench here to get in there underneath the fans, but it's going to be far easier to put this bracket on here. And again, it's got the self-locating pin and post, and you really want to pay attention to that orientation as you're putting it together, and don't force anything. If it doesn't go together smoothly and easily, take it back apart and make sure you really have everything lined up properly. So here's a little better look. See that setup in there. Again, it's kind of a neat approach, but it's a little cumbersome if you've never used that type of a setup before. Now, I've used it several times when I've installed this for some other tests, so I'm a little familiar with it. But honestly, the first time I used it, it took me a few tries to get it right. And now we'll go ahead and put the fans on. And again, you want to pay attention to the orientation here, because we do have airflow, and for this to work as it's designed, we've got slots here in the side that the air will come out and kind of go in the direction that this is spreading out here. So your intake here is on the small side, and your exhaust is going to be on the wide side here of this little triangular notch cut in there, which means you got to pay attention to your fans. You want to make sure you get your fans in the proper rotation. So this one here has the blades that are in the push, so the air is going to go through the fan this direction. That means this fan needs to go on this side, and the other fan, this is the exhaust fan, this needs to go on the back side, because the blades are really on in a different configuration there. So they're pulling air in from this side and pushing air out the back. So that means that fan needs to be mounted on this side. So I have the fans installed now in the proper orientation. So this fan is pulling air in from this side, and this fan over here is helping to push it on through, or I should say pull it through the cooler and push it out the back. So the rear exhaust fan for the case will be over here. So the airflow path will be this way, right out the back of the case. So I'll get the memory modules in, get the rest of the motherboard built up, and we'll get it fired up so you can see what it looks like, and do a little bit of thermal imagery so you can see what it looks like when it's not in the case. It's kind of hard to do when it's in the case. And then we'll do the final thermal testing. So here's a quick rundown of how the RGB control works here. Now this little box, actually there's a magnet inside, so when you put it inside your case, it'll stick to one of the metal interior portions of your case. So that's nice. But down here at the bottom, this bottom button, when you push it, there are actually some blue LEDs at the bottom. They're a little hard to see, but that's for when you connect this system, and there are a couple of extra connectors here that are for Gigabyte or Asus, MSI, ASRock. You can plug these into motherboards that support RGB that have a built-in header, and you can sync all this up. So that's what that is. So you go into that mode, and it basically syncs with the motherboard. So the next mode here is all blue. I think I mentioned that earlier. This is using the temperature probe that's built in or epoxied to the base plate of the cooler, so that when your system is cool or at idle, you're going to see blue, and when it gets hot, and I haven't gotten it to that point yet, but these are supposed to change color to red when you get up there toward the upper end. So we go out of that mode, and the top button here is what switches between all your different RGB, whether it's chase mode or it cycles between colors. There's a breathing effect. There's sort of a stacking effect. The next button down actually controls the speed. So there's the maximum speed there, and you keep pushing in, it gets progressively faster, and all of the modes do that. So here's a breathing mode, and we can actually, that's just changing between the colors, but the more I push it, the faster it changes between the colors. And there we go. So that's the fast mode. Push this again, there's the rainbow color mode, and it's kind of in the slow speed there. I start pushing this button and it cycles faster and faster, and I believe that's the fastest speed. So that's what the buttons here do. Now, one other effect I wanted to show you here. If you look on the side, you can really see, and I'll leave this in the rainbow mode there as it cycles. You can really see the effect as it sort of peeks through that side slot, and that's where air can come out. It goes in from the front here and it can come out from the slot a little bit on the side. But looking in there, you can really see the fins, the way the LED light stack is on the inside of this shell. And when we look down from the top, see if I can get this to focus there. There we go. You get a really cool effect. It's called the hexagon hologram aluminum fin. Something that Cooler Master has sort of made for this particular cooler, and it's a really neat effect there. It looks best, at least in my opinion, in this multicolor or rainbow mode. It's a nice effect. So now we'll use a thermal camera here to sort of look at what's going on at idle. That's the intake side. You can see a little bit of heat on the RAM modules there. Now the color differences there just show the difference in heat and the intensity. So look down there, it's a little warmer down there on the motherboard. But looking at the cooler at idle, things are fairly cool. There's a little bit of heat here on the side. Just a little. I mean, we're only talking a few degrees over the lower temps that we see there, between 28 and 32. This is the exhaust side, and nothing terribly exciting there. And there's the VRM. Of course, there's no load, no overclock. So, looking at this outside of the test case, this is just a quick check where we have a little better access to what's going on. Okay, so now we'll crank some heat up and see what that looks like. So now I've got it cranked up to 4.2 gigahertz. We've got our Prime 95 running so we can get some heat going. Now this is the intake side, and we don't see anything too exciting here. Look down at the RAM, get a little bit of heat there. And a few hot spots on the motherboard there. Again, things are a little warmer. We'll come around, look at the side of the cooler. And again, nothing terribly exciting there. And we'll look at the exhaust side here. And the fans are running at full speed, which is about 1800 RPMs. And we'll look at the VRM there. And that's sort of looking at the very bottom of the cooler, the base of the cooler there, the interface between the base and the CPU, and it's about 44, 45 C, right in that area. And then our CPU temperatures are around 82, 81 degrees, right around their maximum. So the cooler is taking care of the heat. And we'll see what things look like inside the case, although I don't think we're going to see much difference. So now I have the system inside the test case, which is the Enthoo Primo. And this is about as large of a case as you're going to find, so even though that cooler is decent size, it looks pretty small in there. Now, it's hard to get the thermal imaging really through the side cover when it's on, so I'm really getting reflections off of the side cover here. In fact, you can see my hand there. Of course, as warm as my hand is, the color automatically shifts to the gradients based off my hand being the hottest part, and then you see they shift back to the ambient. So really at idle, when we come back here to the rear of the case and look, there's not much to see because the temperature is not all that high really. I will say that these two fans that are on this cooler really push a lot of air. I noticed that when we had the motherboard outside of the case and we cranked up the heat. Those two fans did move a fair amount of air. You can really feel it. But looking here at the back again, we're right around 29, 30 degrees on the exhaust. So let's put an overclock to it, crank it up, and see what the heat looks like coming out the back. And now we have the overclock, 4.2 gigahertz, cranked up. And again, you're not going to see a whole lot there other than my reflection with the side on. So really, we come back here to the back of the case and look at what we see. So we're about 3 degrees, 3.5 degrees I believe where we were, above where we were at idle. And this case fan seems to be doing a pretty good job of pushing the air out. I can feel some warmth there. Of course, you can see my big ugly hand in the way. But again, we're looking at the back of the case here, the exhaust fan, and we're getting close to 34. And our, let's see here, I'm looking over at the CPU temps. We're around 82, 83, right around there max. And again, we're at 4.2 gigahertz cranked up. So you're going to see better results, of course, with a larger case and more fans that can move more air through the case. So the thermal testing showed, at least with the 4770K CPU cranked up, that the cooler is very capable. One of the things I noticed, like I said earlier, is I could really feel a lot of air coming through the cooler. The two fans here do a good job of moving a high volume of air. You got the cool RGB stuff there. Some people don't care for RGB. I actually like it. If you combine that with a more modern motherboard than what I have here, a lot of them do have the support for RGB systems so that you can tie your RGB accessories in and get them all synced up. The key though, in a lot of cases, no pun intended there, is how much air you can move through the case. So if you have a decent size case and some decent fans, then you're always going to have better results with your CPU coolers. And here's another quick look at the chase effect. I do like that. We can look right down the center of the cooler. That's really a nice effect. I like that. So if you've got a case, see if I can get that focus. There we go. If you've got a case with a clear side panel, you can really show this cooler off. Get the zoom in. There we go. There we go. It's always better when it's in focus. So again, it's the Cooler Master Air MA410M. I went ahead and turned the lights out, and you can really see the cool lighting effects there. We'll look right down the center again. That is really nice. So I know liquid coolers are certainly fun to have and show off, but do not discount a good air cooler, which is what this one is. Definitely handles the heat of the 4770K and comes in around $66 on Amazon. You might find it for a few dollars more or less, but that's a pretty good price. I'm going to change the lighting effect here as we finish up. Oh, I like that. Okay, so this is Chris with Overclockers Club. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.